Today on Spirit Spire, we take a trip to the Netherlands, to Fatima, Portugal, and finally end up in Louisville, Kentucky. It's the second part of Erik Huff's conversion story, starting right now. Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Spire. And now, here is your host. Hello and welcome to Spirit Spire. I'm Isaac Fox, joined as usual with my awesome co-host, Erik Huff.
Howdy, everybody.
Good to be with you today. So today we are continuing an episode that we did a few months ago in which we were talking with Erik about his conversion story. And we were able to only get a part of that story at the time. So today we're picking up where we left off. And Erik, if I remember correctly, I just kind of want to tie together some of the loose ends from the last episode and see where to pick up today. A little bit that you had told us last time was during your time in college, you had been roughly an atheist, I believe, and you told us this absolutely amazing story, and I encourage anybody who hasn't heard part one to go back and watch that involved a series of things and events that were far more than coincidental. It was a remarkable and the miraculous story that involved a car wreck, a woman, I think, with one leg, your grandfather, and chili cheese conies.
It was like a series of unfortunate events.
Fortunate in a sense.
But fortunate in the end. I think hopefully today as we move to brighter pastures on my journey, it won't seem so negative. Although obviously God's grace and providence was present in the last take. I'm really happy to talk about my story from this point on.
Sure. As
it's a lot more joyful. Was the C.S. Lewis book "Surprised by Joy" was his story.
Yes.
So this is kind of my surprised by joy. It's definitely a happier take than maybe last time, but I would encourage everyone if you haven't seen the previous video to check that out, because we're gonna jump in roughly where we left off. So.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. So, first part, and this is often true, I think, with many of our lives, there's that period of time in the shadows before the light of Christ comes into our lives. So, one thing I wanted to ask you about, I know that you were not raised Catholic, right? And so when you had these events that began to, I guess, sort of shake you up to the idea that there was something supernatural, there was a being beyond sort of the atheist worldview that you had at the time, did you immediately look towards Catholicism, or did you spend some time thinking about other religious possibilities? And since you had been raised, I think, in a Protestant background, right? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that story and what drew you to Catholicism, particularly as you began to think that, well, God might be real.
Sure. So, like I mentioned a little bit in the last episode, that I was raised Southern Baptist, very devout household, very Bible-oriented, very Scripture-focused, and I would say still my household now, and myself now, still very Scripture-oriented, Scripture-focused. So, my wife and I are both doing multiple Bible studies all the time. I'm trying to do my own Bible in a year. I finished up.
That's awesome.
I did. We start in Advent, so it's not the pagan year. It's the the church liturgical year. Yes. So I read through Isaiah just this year, Isaiah and Luke in December. I just finished up all the Pauline epistles for January. And then the reading assignment for February is the whole Pentateuch. So it's like, at first I thought...
That's heavy duty.
When I did the Isaiah and Luke, I'm like, well, this is far easier than Father Mike Schmitz. And then by like the third month, it's like, here's the entire first part of the Bible, all the books of Moses. Yeah. And they're dense. So Reading
And they
through
have
them now.
those. They have some of those long, really exciting passages, like, "And of the tribe of Asher, there was 157,000, and of the tribe of
Yeah.
Benjamin." And
Yeah.
they're great books. They're so theologically rich, but there are some parts that I think we all struggle trying to find interest in there.
The study that I'm doing right now, it says if you want to skip Leviticus, you can. It's like, that's not imprudent, which I'm not going to. I love reading through Leviticus. It's excellent and necessary, but really scripture oriented. And as I went through life, I really fell off the rails from my faith to having no faith. I think I went more from having a Christian faith to pretty agnostic to having more of, is it syncretism? Perhaps, where it's this universalist approach to all religions, and they all teach you a little bit of the truth. And if you mesh them all together, you get this correct religion where it's a little bit of Buddhism and a little bit of Hinduism and some Islam thrown in there, some Sikhism for spice, and that's the worldview. It was very very hippy dippy. I think I mentioned that in the last podcast a bit, and then moving on from there to kind of a secular atheism that pushes towards more socialist principles, that a very temporal world, and that if the world is not spiritual at all, that all the problems of this world need to be solved by the means that are available in this world, which would be, I don't know, business, government.
So kind of like a naturalist humanism sort of thing.
Yeah. So still, value structures, morals to some extent, although they weren't morals that had to be lived by me. They just had to be believed by me.
Right. And it's difficult. Did you find it difficult to account for those moral and ethical principles without religion?
Yeah. You just don't have the graces to do things.
Yeah.
So you can say, I love the homeless. I love the poor. But ultimately, anything we do in our lives, that's why we go to Mass and we receive the Eucharist and then we're sent out. Anything that we do in our lives is grace. That God allows us to do it as part of our narrative, as a part of our lives. So, I mean, you could sit at home, think about how much you really liked homeless people or the poor and how you cared for them, but actually going out and caring for them or doing something, and I don't mean making a difference like, you can't go out and save everybody right now, but actually interacting with people. It'd be very rare, seldom, or few and far between, despite these big ideas. And there are people who do great work in the secular world. And those people, I would argue, also are receiving graces from God to do that work that they do.
Perhaps unaware.
Yes, even if they are unaware. But as a Christian, as a Catholic, it's much easier to plug straight into that source, straight into God, ask God for the graces to complete whatever task it is, to encounter God in the person in front of you.
It's kind of like walking, walking along the ocean, and occasionally get a splash, getting a little bit wet, as opposed to like actually being right in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah,
like
that's
soaking it up.
That's a really good. That's really good symbolism for it.
It just came to me. It'll be my new book, Fox's Book of Symbolism.
Fox is better than Fox's Book of Martyrs.
Hopefully more historically accurate at any rate.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, you begin to realize that there is God, supernatural something. Why wouldn't you, this might seem obvious, why wouldn't you just go straight back to the Southern Baptist that you had grown up with?
Sure. Well, first off, that probably wouldn't have been a bad choice, all things considered.
Better than a lot.
I was in the Southern Baptist Church because of my grandparents, and I still have, connections and definitely care greatly for those pastors that I had. The pastor who baptized me, the pastor of my grandparents' church. It was a really great community in Covington, Kentucky. I have fond memories, both of my grandparents having passed away and them taking care of our family even in recent history. However, it was there was a bit of experimenting with, because I thought I had it all. I went from thinking I had it all figured out to knowing that I didn't. And when I moved into the realm of knowing I don't have everything figured out, before I was more of a know-it-all.
Right.
I've got it all figured out. I was interested in perhaps other people's ideas a little bit more. So I think I had mentioned previously, my dad had started to attend a mega church.
Okay.
So that's where he was. So I would go with him to that mega church, and they were doing good things. So there's some crossover between the secular humanism that I had in caring for the common man. And they were doing a lot of service projects, a lot of work in the city. They did something called Go Cincinnati. And it wasn't just beautification, but going into districts that had, a poorer fire station and adjusting their facilities and bringing them up to speed and making it nice for the people in those communities. So they really use their resources to bless the community. So I was, it wasn't just because my dad went there. There was also an attraction to it for me. And out of that, and like I said, my wife was raised Catholic. So I was perhaps a little bit more open to the Catholic faith. You
all were not married though yet at this time, right?
No. So this was still my girlfriend. Yeah, my college girlfriend at the time, now wife. Went to Xavier University because she didn't have a Catholic education in high school, so she was still drawn to her faith to some degree. I'd let her speak to whatever degree that is, and then so I was more open to it. A, because of her. But B, because this church that my dad went to is a little bit, I think they had something like 72% of their congregation was former Catholics, being in Cincinnati, Cincinnati being so Catholic. And then the culture of Catholicism is immersive in Cincinnati. So you have, I would say that there's three real, cultural groups that enrich everyone in Cincinnati despite their background. And that's more, it's this very monolithic Catholicism. And then that's paired with a rabbinic Judaism that, and those two together create the civic structure for Cincinnati that was just amazing. I think
that's fascinating.
I think that's like where a huge part of the Cincinnati culture comes from. I think when Nostra Aetate came out, they said in Cincinnati that they didn't really have to read the document because they'd lived it so well for so long. But between those two, and they're very distinctive groups. I mean, if you look at them from the outside, I think the rabbinic Judaism, they have different architecture and stuff. It's not, if you would go into a synagogue, it might remind you, some of it's Art Deco and some of it's Gothic. In Cincinnati with the Plum Street Temple, and I remember going to bar mitzvahs there, and it's very Moorish architecture. So they have these architectural features, which is similar to Catholicism, where there's just these grand churches.
And you have liturgy, you have tradition, you have a lot of things. With the obvious exception of belief in Christ, I think there are some maybe more connections between Judaism and Catholicism.
Yeah, and this was a less orthodox. And there's Orthodox Judaism in Cincinnati. Don't let me don't get me wrong, but this is a very at least in my friends and my circle growing up, it was a more Reformed Judaism, a very Reformed Judaism. So. There's this intermingling of the two, and then that flows into kind of that enriches Cincinnati to some degree. And the third thing is through the Cincinnati chili is it's the Greeks who read generally Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, but their influence, is felt throughout Cincinnati. So between those three groups. you kind of mix that into a pot with, there's a bunch of Irish, a bunch of Germans, and you mix it in with those three groups, and you really get Cincinnati's what comes out on the other side to some degree. So the Catholicism, was no more attractive to me than maybe the Greek Orthodox Church or even Reformed Judaism or something of that nature. But it was part of the ethos also, so I think it's worth pointing out.
Seems all three of these have a lot of tradition, liturgy, higher liturgy kind of approach to religion. Seems to have been very much there in the city itself. But you said something I wanted to ask you a little bit about, because I think that people's stories are really important. Not just the facts of them, but maybe the personal experiences. And people who are examining faith, examining Catholicism, who are at different stages in their journey. And one of the things they may struggle with is the relationships of family and friends. It's not just simply a matter of intellectual conversion just for me. I used to believe this, and now I'm going to change and believe this.
Sure.
But you have these connections that have developed over time that can make that either easier or harder. So you mentioned how your now wife had been raised Catholic. At the time you all were dating, though, you had originally been an atheist. And I know her. I know she's a very devout Catholic now. Was she, at the time, was it more of a nominal Catholicism? And I ask because, if you're Catholic and dating somebody who's an atheist with maybe the long-term goal of marriage and family, one could see it as a challenge. So
yeah. So like I said, there's a certain degree that she was invested in her faith to want to go to Xavier. In it being a Catholic institution being important to her. But on the other hand, she was very open to any ideas I had or something like that. So I wouldn't, I don't know. I don't know if I can speak so much, but I think it might be closer to a nominal faith.
Right. So when you first began...
I guess I can say that. Once you said the words "once you first began," right. Because of her reaction to my interest in Catholicism, in the Catholic faith, and once I started to delve really deep, I don't want to say I got obsessive, but once I started reading a lot, I'm wanting to attend Mass a lot, it definitely was a pitfall. Like, it could have went the other way. She could have been turned off by it.
And that was exactly where I wanted to go with this, because in a situation like that, where you have somebody of faith, but maybe it's more nominal, another person who has been maybe opposed to faith, when they have their conversion, it can be very intense. It's suddenly, their whole life is now devoted to this. And so the other party, even if they've had faith to some extent, can feel like, oh, great, he or she's turning into a religious nut, even though you may now be closer to their faith. And so I had wanted to ask you about that. What was her response to your sudden interest in religion? Was she excited, supportive? Was she unconcerned? Was she concerned about how extreme you got into it? What was her reaction to all that?
Sure. So she's definitely very supportive. I think at that time, so if we kind of pick up where we left off last time directly, I was dealing with a lot of loss in my life. When you hit your, 22, 23 also, not major health conditions, but health becomes a problem, and or something you think about if you're blessed to go that long without it being a problem. So I was dealing with some health issues at the time, which caused me great anxiety. I'd been in that car accident,
right?
And I would wake up at night and just think I'm like dying in some kind of very violent way, just uncontrollably. So I'd wake up in my sleep, screaming, not infrequently, and had great anxiety.
Yeah,
just great anxiety. There was nothing, very wrong surface level right then and there, but just very anxious about many things. So at that point, when I start to have this conversion, I think that it was helpful in regards to that. So I think she was supportive with me, because it's like somewhat of a miracle that like I'm not, up all night anxious,
right,
in this grave despair, waking up with these night terrors, or whatever the problem was.
So through this conversion process, you begin to find some relief and peace from
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So
Okay.
I didn't really get to touch upon this. It's really going full circle. But one of the things, and what drew me to the Catholic faith, is I would go pray in different churches. I wanted to see all the beautiful churches in Cincinnati. Now I have this faith as a thing. I'm interested. I go into churches and I want to look around and I want to know what all the art means and the architecture means, and what are the traditional practices of Christianity. Because the megachurch, I think that gives you everything you need in terms of community, in terms of being able to do Christian causes and assist others. Helps with your prayer life, scripture, relating it to your daily life, all those things. But then I also had this longing, like they would mention things at the megachurch like the ascension, and I don't know what that means.
Right.
And there's also, this is funny, there was an assumption that you know what the ascension means, but I don't at this point. So I really want to know about theology. I want to know about the faith. I want to know about the traditions of Christianity.
Right.
And obviously with Catholicism, it has that. So I would go into the Catholic churches and look around. I mentioned the one that was important to me was the Basilica in Covington, Kentucky of the Assumption. Again, joke full circle. So I would go in there. I talked about the artwork last time with Frank Duveneck, but I would drive past there on my way to work during this period with where I had great anxiety, and I would pray in there often. And one of the biggest turnoffs to me was Our Lady and Mary, and my questions about her.
Did this come from your Protestant background?
I think, yeah. So it was my Protestant background. I think I might have mentioned this in the last one that, it was, it didn't make any sense. Like, my background is I'm an atheist, but Mary is definitely blasphemy to God who doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my logic at the time. It wasn't a deep-seated opposition to Mariology. The whole thing, for some reason, to me was, and I think this is spiritual, and I think it affects many Protestants, maybe even those interested in the faith. So it's a sickening thing to think about for me now. Is it made me very uncomfortable, very unwell, to see even in the Marian imagery. I don't know if it's supernatural or not, but there was a time when, if you hear about like a cult or something, and it makes you feel, oh, that gives me the heebie-jeebs.
Right.
That's what it would do for me at this time. But I had learned a little bit more about the Catholic faith and had some more interest in Marian things. And there was the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe. I don't know if I mentioned this last time.
I don't think you did.
There's a statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe in the Basilica in Covington. And when I would drive from my mammal's to work, I'd have to drive past the Basilica. I think I mentioned that portion in the last one. Across the Roebling Suspension Bridge, the Humming Bridge, and then into Cincinnati for work. And I would stop often at the Basilica there and pray. And one time I really wanted to know more about the Marian stuff. So I'd never lit a candle or anything. So I'd done everything. I had prayed, and I still had this great anxiety. I wasn't sleeping. I was worried about my health. It was just an existential nightmare still. Yeah. And so I lit a candle at that statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and I immediately felt, I don't remember what I prayed, but I immediately felt peace from it. And then that's really what started to churn the wheels about the Marian aspect of Catholicism, which, once you get into theology, and knowing what the faith is about, it's not a small part, but it's not everything.
Right.
But exteriorly, looking in at Catholicism, it's the biggest thing. Like, it's the biggest stumbling block, I think. Just in terms of, like, I think even there they have a giant stained glass window in that basilica of Ephesus in the declaration of Mary as Mother of God. There's just this massive window. Right. And I'm like, what is this? So I started to have thoughts, I guess, about that. I think that's a good place to take a quick break and get back with more of Marion Thoughts and starting to wrestle with that a bit.
Well, Marion Thoughts are some of my favorites, also as a convert. So I'm really excited to hear more about that. So let's take a very short pause, and we'll come back in just a minute with more of Erik Huff's conversion story right here on Spirit and Spire. Back to Spirit and Spire. We've been talking today with one of our co-hosts, Erik Huff, about his conversion story. And Erik, you were telling us a little bit in the last segment about how you had sort of an initial, sort of maybe almost revulsion towards the extreme Marian, devotions of the Catholic Church. And then you were just telling how you had litten is not correct grammar, how you had lit? I forgot how to speak English. I think lit.
You lit a candle.
You had lit a candle in front of a statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And
this reminds me of in the 1611 KGV, the original.
Yeah.
One of my favorites is one of my favorite verses. I can't remember which verse off the top of my head, but because I'm immature, 1611 obviously has the very archaic language, even more so than a King James version today. And one of my favorite verses is in Judges, and it said, "And she lighted off her ass." It's a great line.
That's awesome.
Which meant she got off her donkey.
Exactly, but that could be interpreted in a number of ways. All right. So you had lit a candle in front of... Not lighted, nor alighted.
Yeah.
A candle in front of a statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and you felt some peace from that, and this sort of began an interest in learning more about Mary and Catholic teaching on that,
or at least being open. And then I guess we'll go to me being a man of extremes and get into a very high Mariology by the end of this. So, I lit the candle, and it just made it. Like I said, I felt a presence, I felt a peace come over me, and I still have problems, still have nightmares, whatever, but definitely a step in the right direction. And then I felt, more of a draw towards that. I also had mentioned how near my mom's house, there was that St. Anthony shrine.
Yes.
And how I would interact with that. I don't know if I mentioned this portion in the last story, but one of the things that, I prayed the Rosary for the first time with my wife at the Our Lady of the Holy Spirit Center. And the thing that my wife prayed for was that she would get her Portuguese citizenship, which she had been waiting months and months and months to see, had no word on, and she got it the next morning. So it was that's amazing. So I really had to...
How did you feel about praying a rosary?
I was interested in just pursuing it, those next steps. I really enjoyed it.
Were you concerned going into it, feeling that praying to Mary might be blasphemous or something?
Yeah, and I'd already heard maybe some EWTN arguments or something towards it not praying to Mary, but for her intercession.
Right. Okay.
So there wasn't those theological qualms. And then the version of the Rosary we prayed, I think it was the Joyful Mysteries, all scriptural.
Right. Not the Assumption of the Coronation.
No. Right. Which the Assumption is my favorite mystery. now, but yeah. So
I would never have assumed that.
Yeah, don't want to make any assumptions here.
That's right.
So yeah, we prayed in this beautiful rosary garden that had like statuary of each mystery. Nice. So it had like the finding of the child Jesus, the temple. I'm like, this is all clearly scriptural. Like I said, I didn't know what's the ascension, what's this. There's certain things. Obviously, I know about the crucifixion. I know about the resurrection, staples, the nativity, but I don't know all the things. I don't know all the major things even. Right. And so, yeah, so I was, at this point, my interest is piqued, and I'm like, wow, there's really something to this. And I remember I prayed, this was the third time I asked for a sign, which, the other two went well for me too, but I don't recommend it to others. But I remember I went to that St. Anthony shrine, and there's an outdoor votive candle shrine where it's got St. Anthony. It's got another image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, I think, in there. And I lit a candle there, and I said, like, if this Marion thing is real, like things related to Mary, it's not satanic or evil, like, can I have a sign that, I'm pretty much asking Mary, like, are you real? Which is weird because even if you're Protestant, you would think she's real. Yeah. But, I think I did ask for another sign. Right. Got to keep things straight. And the shrine is like from my car to this like little shrine. It's like a little grassy ridge. I mean, it's got to be 4 feet. Right. And I'm walking and directly in my path, when you see a wild animal or something, like your brain goes berserk, like, very scary shock. Yeah. There's something right in front of me. And it's a snake with its head crushed, just laying in the grass right in front of me. I have a picture of it on my phone.
Which that's in the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Well, I don't think I had seen that.
Fatima?
I don't think it's in that. Fatima. I had never seen it at this time. I think it's a normative icon that predates all of those.
Yes, of the serpent's head crushed under the foot of the Blessed Virgin.
I didn't know. I really didn't know anything about it. I might have seen like Mary standing on a globe before, but I don't ever remember seeing I take a picture of it because I'm like, that's weird. I just thought about this. And so later that night, I went for a jog in my neighborhood. There's a parish, I don't know what it was called, maybe St. John or something in Silverton Deer Park area. And they had their like picnic, and the picnics aren't as big here as they are in Cincinnati. Like every parish has a giant picnic in Cincinnati. That's a huge part of the culture. And it was their church picnic. And I went to go get a beer or to gamble or something that I'm like, Catholics do these crazy things at their parish picnic. And it was in their gym, not in the church, in the gym. And in the gym, there was an image of, I think, St. Joseph and an image of Our Lady. And they were statues, but they were in the gym and they were behind this metal like cages. So like if you threw a basketball and it hit it wouldn't hurt them. But they wanted them in their gym, which is pretty cool. And when I went in, I noticed in that statue of Our Lady in that cage in the gym, it had her crushing the head of the snake, and it looked like the snake that I had seen. And I swear I just stood there like, what is going on? Like I had no idea. Got my
sign.
Yeah. So I was convicted at that point. So I think from there, I really wanted to learn everything I could about, Our Lady. Is this scriptural? There's a lot of Marian apparitions. Are these things real?
Right.
And I was going around a lot of like small Catholic bookstores and stuff too that had like some out there stuff. So, I'm seeing all kinds of, this is a lot of information to take in all at once. So, I don't know. So I'm very perplexed by all of it. And then, praying the Rosary, those sorts of things. and I think I had mentioned the Rosary a little bit in the other one. We went to the St. Anthony Shrine. But the next thing is like, I don't know if I mentioned the brown scapular.
No, I don't think so.
Last time. So like, I'm just get like on this Marion kick because I'm like, well, we prayed the Rosary and this thing happened. I saw the snake now. I'm like, what is all of this about? So I find out about the brown scapular. Gabrielle gets me one from the Our Lady of the Holy Spirit Center in Norwood. And I know that I need to, I read about it and it says even Protestants can receive graces from this.
Right.
And I'm like bought into anything I pick up though at this point. Like,
right.
I'm like, what is this? So yeah, this is the first time I would really have to interact with a priest. Did I talk about this at all before?
I don't. Not that I remember. So it's been a few months since we did the last episode. It's funny though, because it really resonates with me what you're saying, because I think once, when you're on the journey and once you've begun to accept the fact that God can work these sacramentals.
Yeah.
There is a phase of overdoing it, because then you feel like every sacramental you see, if it be a scapular, if it be a rosary, if it be a holy card, like I have to have that and that and that and that, and like I'm gonna wear them or put them around my house or whatever. And sometimes it can become we can go a little over the top with it.
I don't think I went too far, but I think
I think I probably did.
I think I definitely had some interest in it. And if you've ever heard, I have a priest friend who tells this story about this lady out in the country, and she would always have him bless candles for her. Mm-hmm. And give it, and bless some holy water. And every time for wherever they lived, there was these terrible storm surges would come through this corridor. And whenever he would have her bless the holy water, bless the candles, and every time there was a storm, she would light all these candles and put this holy water all over her house. And I think one night she took all the candles and they're all lit, and she slipped on the holy water and threw them up in the air, like landed on her backside. And she's like, so she goes, Father says one week after this happened, he said, don't you need more candles and holy water? And she's like, I think I'm just going to pray.
It's funny though, and I want to hear what you're going to say about the scapular, because I'll share this very quickly. I had a little bit of an experience with the scapular as well. So before I actually entered the church, I had been intellectually convinced for quite a while.
Sure.
So, but this was before I actually finished RCIA, and maybe I hadn't quite started. It was within that year though. And I had asked a priest I knew, well, can I use holy water? And he said he felt that was okay, even though I wasn't. And that's, whether it is or not, it's a whole another question, because as it happened, I hadn't actually been validly baptized. And of course, holy water is partly a remembrance of the waters of baptism. So
sure.
Maybe it wouldn't have been ideal for me to use it, but maybe it wasn't bad to have a bottle of it in my apartment either. And around the same time, because I dealt so much with anxiety as well, and we'll probably talk about this whenever we do the second part of my conversion story, I had lots of fears of like demonic influence and stuff like this, right? Lots of fears of going to hell. And then I started having dreams that were very troublesome to me. And I was in a place where I felt really lost one day. Like I just, I was believing Catholic doctrine for the most part, but I was in this place of thinking maybe I committed the unforgivable sin, right? And was just doomed to hell.
Yeah.
So I was struggling with this real depression and
Isn't
darkness.
that in an earlier episode we talked about Bertrand Russell?
Yes.
And he makes a point that one of his reasonings for Christianity being false is for people being anxious about this unforgivable sin. Yeah. Which is a great point on his part, I think.
It's and I think we'll do a follow-up episode on Bertrand Russell and get around to that. But there was a gentleman that I knew, and I was already going to what is now my parish, St. Martin of Tours. And there was a gentleman I knew there who has since passed away. He was an elderly man, very saintly, and I think behind his back, people had nicknamed him the Saint of St. Martin's. Just a beautiful human being, constantly in prayer. He was there for every daily mass, led every rosary, read the 3 o'clock Divine Mercy prayers, like as long as he could walk pretty much. And I didn't know any priests at the time, but I had gotten to know him a little bit. So I was there for maybe like Divine Mercy prayers or something. I don't remember. And I said, "Bud, I talk to you for a minute afterwards?" So we go to the back little side St. Gregory Chapel. And I was just looking for some kind of hope in the midst of this very heavy gloom I was in.
Yeah.
And at this point in time, I didn't wear a scapular. I'd probably read about it. It was just something that really hadn't entered my field of vision. The rosary, sure, like I knew about that, right? But the scapular was not anything prominent. So I kind of poured out my troubles to this gentleman. And he said 2 things. It seemed evident to me that he didn't want to try to give me theological advice. He felt that should probably be left better for someone else, namely a priest. So one thing he said was that he wanted to introduce me to one of the priests there that was at the parish, and he would set up a meeting for me to talk to him. And that priest ended up becoming the priest that married my wife and I, and one of my son's middle name is named after him. The other thing he did, because Bud always wore a scapular, never took it off, and had had it for years. He takes his scapular off, and he said, "I want to give this to you." And he had me put on the scapular, and he led me through a Marian prayer of basically putting myself trusting in the maternal protection of Mary. And one of the things that I've been dealing with at this time was some particular dreams. And my life, as you'll hear when we do our story, took many circuitous routes, and there was times where I fell badly away from the faith. And so I did end up dealing with these again later on. But from that day, and this was around the day I started using holy water, so I don't know if it was which or both, but those dreams vanished for like months.
It's crazy.
And I didn't even notice it. Until sometime later, I was like, whoa, I'm not having this issue anymore. So my wife has kind of begun making a point of having some of our children wear scapulars, and there's
just the bad ones.
They're just the bad ones, yeah, not the good ones. But I think she would tell you that she notices behavioral improvements.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing,
because they know that she has something to grab on.
Right. Yeah. Here, come over here, kid. I'll grab you by the scapular. But I think that it's easy, perhaps, for somebody to think, well, that's just superstition.
Sure.
Right. And to be fair, it's possible to view it in a superstitious way. The Sabbatine privileges, the promises made with the scapular, are dependent upon one living a holy life, right? It's not like I'm going to pop this scapular on and by some, no matter what I do, I'm going to heaven. However, I would argue that God can work in remarkable ways when he wants to show his power. And secondly, when you wear it, you're becoming part of that confraternity. So you are receiving the prayers of thousands of people that you would not have otherwise received by virtue of popping this on. Because there's people all around the world that are praying for anybody that's wearing the scapular. And I think we miss that. That's not superstition. That's a reality. You just maximize the prayers you receive by, 100,000 fold. That's got to do something. Yeah.
It's crazy too. I think you go from being one of the souls that has no one to pray for them to having, a bunch of people praying for you often.
Including phenomenal monks and nuns in the Carmelites.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
It's a great
order. Anyway, back to your story of the scapular.
So I took the scapular to my lunch break. Does this sound familiar at all?
I'm not sure, but it sounds good. I would have taken it to a priest, but you took it to your lunch break. So
no, I took it on my lunch break. I took it to a church.
Okay.
And I thought, well, I have a 45-minute lunch break. I can just run in this church. how often, if you walk into a church sanctuary, I mean, you're at St. Martin's. St. Martin's is open 24/7.
Yeah.
Of those 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, how often could you just walk into the sanctuary and just walk into a priest?
Like only at Mass.
Only at Mass, maybe, right? And well, at Mass they're going to be there, but you're not going to be able to interact with them from the altar.
Right.
And it would be very inappropriate if you tried. But so I went in there on my lunch break, not anywhere near a Mass time, not anywhere near confession time, to my knowledge, not anywhere near any sort of event. And I just felt like I should go to this church. It is the closest one to my work-ish, proximity-wise, or it was at least the one I knew closest to my work. And I went into this church. It's a beautiful church. And I go in the side door. It's unlocked. I go in. There's people praying, like 5 or 6 people just praying, which is amazing, right? And it's pretty rare you go into a church and there's 5 or 6 people just praying throughout the pews. And I felt like spiritual warfare, like just crazy things entering my mind. I wanted to get up and leave. It was very stressful. But I felt like a little voice like, stay, wait.
Yeah.
And I keep praying. And then, I mean, it's a 45-minute lunch break. I want to go get a sandwich or something.
Sure.
So I'm like, I got to go. And I feel like, stay, wait. And then I feel like, all right, my lunch break is definitely over. I'm going to get fired or at least get written up. So I need to get back to work. And I feel, like stay, wait. And so I wait. And then finally I feel like, all right, get up and go. So when I get up and go, there's a young priest. He looks younger than me. I think he's a little older than I am. He's walking a dog. And as I walk out the door of the church, he's walking the 10 feet from his car door to the door of what I assume is the rectory.
So the only 30 seconds you could have.
The only window I might have caught him, that day. So I don't know what to say. And I've never met a priest or anything at this point. So I was like, excuse me, Father. And this guy looks younger than I am.
Right. You're like, this is weird.
And this could just be my imagination. It could actually happen. But I'm pretty sure he clapped back with a really good, yes, my child.
Yes.
But in any case, whether he said that or not, the point still stands. That was the vibe I got. That was my perception. And so I go, hey, I pull like the scapular out of my pocket and I've got like a bunch of candy wrappers and, dust balls and it's real embarrassing. And I pull out the scapular. It's like, hey, I was really interested in this thing and I don't know how I feel about all this Marion stuff. And probably said it in less eloquent terms than that. And he's like, oh yeah, the brown scapular of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Let me run inside and get the book so I can. So he goes through and does the full initiation of the brown scapular for me. And he's like blessing it with the holy water. And I had never seen holy water. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. This lady in an electric wheelchair comes up behind him. He's like, in the name of the Father, hello, Janice, and how are you today? And keeps blessing you. So he's very warm and pastoral, but obviously following the rubrics and very taking great care to do things the right way. So just definitely a very profound experience there for the scapular. But where the story really takes a turn, and the height of my Marion influence, so to speak, is still at this point. I'm conflicted between whether I believe, should I go to the Catholic faith? I'm still at a point. My syncretism has shrunk.
Right.
So my window is narrowed.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's Christianity. I know it's Christ. I know that from the encounter I talked about at the last episode with the lady with one leg.
Right.
I knew I was experiencing Jesus Christ in that moment. The weird Catholic furniture, which had the Eucharist. Now there's this Marian aspect. but also a very, doing good things in the church, that mega church. So I don't know if I'm supposed to continue with Protestantism or make a big switch for me and become Catholic. So I guess, I tie up that loose end when I get the new job in Louisville. I've already spoke to that some. And before that job, I have 2 weeks in Europe. 1 week I spend in the Netherlands, and 1 week I spend with Gabrielle, my now wife, my then girlfriend's family in Portugal. And on that trip I know my family brought, the Dutch Reformed Church to the New World and to New York City. And I know that's a big part of kind of my heritage at this point. So I think it's just the religion of my forefathers.
Right.
I should definitely at least explore that to some degree. And then I go, on the other hand, there's Catholic faith, and I can see that in Portugal. So I'm pretty much pitting the two against each other, or at least knowing that this is what I'm looking for while I'm there. That's kind of part of my roadmap. Now, I want to have fun and enjoy my vacation. It's not just a spiritual journey. So this is in the kind of the back of my mind. But still something I'm cognizant of in that moment. So part of it, like I said, I had talked to my best friend who's not religious at all. And I asked him, I told him I was thinking about converting and going to RCIA because I had met this priest at that church. And he said, oh, it's okay that you're moving because my cousin is a Catholic priest in Louisville where you're moving to. And so I'll just reach out to him. Well, I hadn't heard anything from the cousin up until this point. So I'm still waiting on that. And so I go to the Netherlands first. And the night that I go to bed in the Netherlands, I turn my phone on and I get on the Wi-Fi and I'm able to check my email for the first time. I've got an email in my inbox from Father Jeff Schooner. So I have that in my mind that all right, there is movement with this, in my own life. This could be providential. So I respond to him and I set up a meeting for when I get back. While I'm in the Netherlands, the Dutch Reformed Church is completely non-existent for how powerful it was, where it holds, where it stands in history. It's pretty gone.
Okay.
Most of those churches are museums or coffee shops or something else, or some sort of storefront. Or if they exist as a church, it's 100% tourism.
Right.
And not to say that there's not a lot of tourism in Rome and in other places in our churches, but it doesn't seem like there's a visible faith, a visible people. Whereas the Catholic Church is there, they're not doing great, but they're the same. Mm-hmm. The same as here to some degree. Probably a little better than the East Coast churches here from what I've seen. But they're doing all right. So that really, turned a knob in my head. I saw other things I thought Rembrandt was assuredly Protestant, and maybe that is the case. But I saw images where he had painted his son in the Rijksmuseum as a Franciscan. What if his son was a Franciscan? I'd seen him paint images from the Book of Tobit on the trip. So he at least has an awareness of these very Catholic things. Vermeer was baptized by the Franciscans in Delft, and that's where the Catholic Church stands. So you have the Odenkirk and the Newkirk, and you can't get into either of them. They're locked, even on touristy days. But you can go pray in the Catholic Church right in between the two at any time. And there's an image of Our Lady, and people are in there praying and genuflecting, and it seems much more like here, people are actually Catholic or actually Christians.
Right. Instead of it just being a historical monument.
It's just the other churches are just a historical monument, which I found pretty dissuading, because I think even at the time my parents were there, people were somewhat religious. They had their own Bible Belt in the Netherlands, and when my parents had lived there, they said people wouldn't even wash their car on Sunday and stuff, which this is far removed from what I experienced. So Yeah, that was upsetting, to say the least. And definitely there was nothing pointing me into a more Protestant direction that I encountered in the Netherlands at all. And I even began to think, like, I went into more Catholic parts of the Netherlands too, like Noord-Brabant, and thinking things like, if my family did live here, they were Catholic at one time. So, like, it's just not far enough back. If I go further back, then they're also Catholic. So, like, the Protestant argument completely just kind of crumbled.
That whole faith of your fathers thing, you feel like there's sort of a pull there, maybe even almost a sense of responsibility. But then you realize that if you go far enough back, the faith of your fathers, as would be true of any of us, is going to be Catholic.
Yes. And it was very just clear from the culture of the Netherlands and going to, the different provinces. So that was one thing. I definitely started to really comprehend and be cognizant of the Eucharist while I was in Utrecht at one point. And I started to think about it more and more and what I felt about that based on my previous experiences and some experiences I had there. And then I think I pretty much affirmed more of a Eucharistic theology in my own mind. And then when we flew to from the Netherlands, we went KLM to Portugal, and the church is very vibrant there to some degree. There's a lot of churches, a lot of priests, a lot of beauty. But once you go to Fatima, it's like the real deal.
Yeah.
Like, it happened. This miracle happened there. This apparition happened there. Could feel the Holy Spirit in a way I'd never felt before. The closer I got to, kind of ground zero of the apparition site where the tree had been.
And you can't explain Fatima away. You can explain away, like, a lot of private visions and mystical experiences, maybe with difficulty, but, Fatima is such, like, it's like a thorn in the side of disbelief, because there is almost no way to really, if you're going to look at it seriously, it's something monumental that you have to grapple with, that something happened that we cannot explain. Yeah. It's like running into a mountain.
And while I was there, I mean, the people who believe that Our Lady of Fatima brought down the Berlin Wall and communism in Russia, and that there's pieces of the wall there at Fatima. There's even this area where there's things people left behind. Somebody had crafted a rosary out of giant chunks of the Berlin Wall, and it just left it there, and they don't know how it got there. And then, like, seeing JP2 in the crown of Our Lady of Fatima and Fatima and the bullet, and the nun who was there was telling us that we were looking at the crown, and it was just the crown. It was in a museum when it's not on display on Our Lady. She said, like, Our Lady of Fatima spared Portugal from World War II, like she said. And they were completely spared, which is insane. Yeah. Especially considering that they have a western coastline.
Yeah, they shouldn't have been spared.
Yeah, that the Allies could have traversed across, that would have been strategic to the Germans. They were completely spared when most other countries in Europe, fell pretty hard. So they built this crown for Our Lady out of all the jewels from all these villages in Portugal. And in the center of the crown is the bullet. What I didn't know is that the Holy Father, he had an assassination attempt on his life on the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima in Vatican Square. And he believed that Our Lady had saved his life and spared him. And he gave one of the bullets that had been in his body, had pierced his body, to have placed in that crown. Yeah. And the people at Fatima, the Portuguese, were like, "We love you, Holy Father, but this crown is really for something else. We don't want to make any alterations."
Oh, I didn't know this.
To the crown, because it's not what it's about. It's not all about you.
Yeah, and you would, and that's interesting. I didn't know that, because you would figure if the Pope wanted to do it, everybody would be like, okay.
They weren't. The way it had seemed, how it was presented to us, was that it didn't seem like they were fully on board.
Gotcha.
And the miracle of that is when they took that bullet It just fit right in that hole in the crown.
Like it was made for it.
Like it was made for it. And they didn't have to alter the crown in any way.
Wow.
And
I did not know that.
Yeah, and they had other artifacts that he'd given them. The fisherman's ring, which I thought they were supposed to destroy when they died, but maybe it was an earlier Marion ring or something. But it definitely wasn't the fisherman's ring. They destroy those. So it did have Our Lady on it. So maybe it was this ring he had when he was a bishop. Could be. That was related to Our Lady that he wore. But they had a lot of the JP2 artifacts, and I'm like, what is this? Like, obviously had a profound and moving experience there. So when I came back, my mind was pretty much made up. I mean, it was pretty settled for me. It was difficult for me to, and as you go on, there's a simultaneously, like, this is my own personal journey. There's also an intellectual journey, and these two things are crossing paths constantly. Right. And they're one and the same. So just understanding the Eucharist, understanding the theology behind Mary. But I think that I had experienced or felt, and I don't mean that in a solely emotional sense, but I had either experienced or felt many of these inclinations before I understood the theology of it.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, that does. So that's probably a good place to pause for just a moment as we take our next little break. So 2 weeks in Europe seems to kind of solidify, as you're looking between Protestantism and Catholicism, seems to kind of solidify that heading towards the Catholic Church. So let's take a little break there and then maybe pick back up in the next episode with kind of bringing things up to actually entering the church and what's happened since then. So we'll take a very short pause and we'll be back with more of Erik Huff's conversion story on Spirit Spire.
Hey everyone, another sponsor for today's episode is the Cathedral of the Assumption in the heart of downtown Louisville, Kentucky. It is the spiritual center of parish and family life and is a historic treasure for the Catholic Church in America. Take a tour or consider visiting for Mass. Check them out at cathedraloftheassumption.org.
Welcome back to Spirit Spire. We're still continuing our discussion with Erik Huff today on his conversion story. And Erik, you were kind of wrapping up the last segment telling us about your time in Europe for a couple of weeks and visiting Portugal, Fatima. And it seems at this point, when you come back, that you're probably at least 90% convinced of becoming Catholic.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of the story you've told us has involved some really remarkable experiences you had. And I know also, though, knowing you're really well grounded in theology, know your faith really well. And so I know you're also studying a lot, as, that was kind of going on behind the scenes with all of this. So maybe you can kind of bring us up to entering the church. So you come back. Did you then decide to go ahead and start RCIA, or did you a little more searching and exploring first?
I think it's called OCIA now.
It is?
They're changing it, or at least that's what I've heard. But yeah, RCIA.
But you couldn't have done OCIA because it's in the past.
It didn't exist yet. No. But no OCIA for me. RCIA, yeah. So like I said, while I was in Europe, I came into contact with my best friend's cousin, Father Jeff Schooner. And
who was in Louisville?
And who's in Louisville at St. Patrick, St. Boniface here downtown. Lovely St. Boniface downtown, and then my home parish, St. Patrick. So I met with him. Gosh, as soon as I moved into town, that was one of the first things I did. Was I met with Father Jeff, and you say 95%. There's a lot of it in theory, but I remember like sitting there talking to a priest and thinking like, am I going to do this? It becomes like 50-50 again pretty quick. So I went and I spoke with him, and then that's what started with the RCIA process. I decided I was going to do RCIA.
At St. Patrick's?
At St. Patrick. Okay. I really felt, I even in the moment realized that there's like a lot of providence to just running into a priest like that.
Right.
So yeah, I ended up going through RCIA at St. Patrick. It's a great experience. Again, that's my parish even now. I ended up working at St. Patrick's for 3.5 years, I think, through the pandemic.
So what year did you enter the church?
2018.
How was that?
2018, April Fool's Day, 2018. So I can always, April the 1st, I can always say April Fool's. So, it was amazing. Easter Vigil, obviously, I went through RCIA, did it, the most normative way, I guess, these days. And, it was, it's probably unlike anything I've ever experienced outside of, my wedding day or my
born, but you don't
my
remember.
Baptism.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen, I think it's Anchorman 2? One of my favorite parts. I bring this up at the most inopportune times. Like, there'll be like a table of people, and I'll be like, have you guys all ever seen Anchorman 2? But Steve Carell's character, Brick, is like, they're telling stories about the past that they were all there for. And they're like, remember when we did this? And they're all laughing. He goes, hey, you guys remember when I was born and I came out and I was crying? Wah, wah. And they're like, no, Brick. And I don't think you remember that either. So that's what it kind of reminded me of.
That's funny.
Yeah. I don't think you remember being born either. That's impossible.
So you came to Louisville job-related initially, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, my now wife is from here.
Okay.
So a little bit of job-related, a little bit to get down here.
Right.
Where her family is.
So did you all get married after you became Catholic?
Absolutely, a long time after.
Gotcha.
So 2018, she was still in school. I was done. So in 2017, I moved down here halfway through the year. Started RCIA almost immediately. Finished out in April 1st at the Easter Vigil that year at St. Patrick. And then I had my own apartments. I guess I moved around a little bit, but and I lived down here before she came down, and then when she came down, it was still another year before we got married.
Gotcha.
Or so, and then we got married in June of 2020, but we were supposed to get married at Fatima because Gabrielle has the Portuguese citizenship.
Right.
I had everything cleared with the diocese here and there, and it was really coming together nicely until the pandemic hit.
COVID happened.
Yeah, so we had a beautiful wedding here in Louisville.
The pandemic changed a lot of people's plans.
Yeah, so definitely had some plans change, but like I said, receiving those sacraments, coming into the church, receiving confirmation. I was already baptized validly.
Right. Which I was not. So
No, you mentioned that earlier. That's why I said that.
I had baptism, confirmation, Eucharist all in one night.
Yeah, so I did not have baptism that night. But again, I remember, at my baptism, and it made me reflect too on other circumstances in my life. Even it put me back into my childhood as a Southern Baptist. That I remember when they would talk about the Lord's Supper and like how they would explain their theology of it. I didn't believe that. I never affirmed their belief in the Lord's Supper.
Interesting.
So like I didn't have an alternative.
Right.
But I knew
just didn't sound right.
It wasn't right. What they were saying was incorrect. Like they're like, you have to this is a really important thing. You have to really believe in this, but it's also a symbol. It's not real.
Right.
So like, I mean, there is a dialectic nature there. And those two things were kind of at odds even then. So when I received communion the first time, just a really profound moment. Like I said, I'll never forget it. Moved by emotion. I laughed, I cried. That whole night was just
beautiful,
fantastic.
That's an interesting point when you're saying that, in that Southern Baptist theology, there is an insistence that this is a very important thing to do, even though it's purely symbolic,
right,
in that line of thought. And that's something I've considered a few times over the years, is the fact that Jesus commands us to do it. And so the traditions that don't hold...
And that ordinance is important.
It's very important, right? This is critical. This is right before his passion.
And to the Southern Baptists too. Like these ordinances are important, and their theology does, really emphasize that.
And I think it's interesting to me now. There's loads of scriptural passages we could go to demonstrate that Jesus means it, right? The real presence is true. But just kind of this an overall thought that I've had a few times over the years is that the Lord's Supper and baptism are the two sacraments which are still, well, it's not valid as a sacrament. Baptism can be valid in Protestant churches. But let's say the two rites, the two rituals, the two practices out of the 7 sacraments that Catholics have, which Protestants still do, right? And marriage. And they recognize that they're important. They recognize them because they're very important in the scriptures. These aren't just nice thoughts. Jesus commands the disciples to go into all the world and baptize with a Trinitarian formula,
Sure.
He commands them, do this often.
Do you know what your formula was that made it...
In the name of Jesus. My dad baptized me, and he sort of eschewed all formulas or, anything to do with that.
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of where I'm going with this, because...
Well, even in the Catholic Church... people have been baptized in problematic formulas in recent history, and they had to go back and have to be rebaptized, confirmed, and reordained.
Wow.
Priests, because the we factor. People would say, deacons and stuff would say, we baptize you.
Oh, interesting.
But it's Christ who baptizes.
Right. And they're speaking in persona Christi. So it's I baptize.
So mine, I reached out to my pastor, and like the first thing to just verify on the formula.
Yeah.
Maybe a year or so ago. It's like, this isn't about those Catholic baptisms, is it? I was like, wow.
Maybe.
Yeah, but it was funny that, he affirmed that he'd done it the way the church approves, Well, and
it's fortunate that tradition has remained so firmly in most Protestant churches, because it does avoid a lot of confusion when somebody converts, But the point I was going to make was, in my family, perhaps even more, I think you find this in a lot of Protestantism, but perhaps even more so in my particular family setting, is the idea of the sort of the spiritualization of everything. And so this idea that Christ is doing away with all the Old Testament rituals and rubrics and all of this, right? Matter, this earth, rituals, all that don't matter very much, or at all, perhaps. And so everything is very hyper-spiritualized. And the idea is that this is greater than the Old Testament rituals, which could not save us. And that is true. But as Catholics, we would say that the rites of the New Covenant are greater because they actually contain the grace that the old ones signified but did not contain. But if, from the more fundamentalist perspective, if Christ is coming with this purely spiritual approach, this non-sacramental approach, and he's doing away with temples and priests and sacrifices and altars made of gold and rituals and all this and that, then why on earth would he establish and command 2 rituals which honestly have even less power or meaning than the sacrifices of the Old Covenant?
Yeah.
If they're purely symbols.
Yeah.
That doesn't actually make any sense when you think about it. It seems to me that either Christ meant what he said, and so this really is his body and blood, which is greater than the animal sacrifices of the Old Covenant, or else he would have just said, clearly bread and wine aren't as great as animal blood, right? In the sense of like a sacrifice, wouldn't seem to be. Or else it seems he would have just said, no ritual whatsoever. Just read your Bible and pray.
Yeah.
And in fact, Jesus never even speaks a word about the Bible, about that there's going to be a New Testament or anything like New Testament writings, But he does say we've got to do this communion thing and this baptism thing. So, yeah, it seems like they must have been awfully important.
In my Bible growing up, I still have the page. I think the whole Bible disintegrated at some point, but it says on that page, baptized, and it has like October 15th. And then it says saved October 15th.
Right.
Which was good because it was the same day. Because it coincided. Whereas, some people would, I guess, once you make your proclamation of faith, it's not until much longer that you're baptized or something. Maybe the next weekend, I don't know.
Well, Erik, that's wonderful. And, now you're here in Louisville. And I didn't realize you got married in 2020. Because I met you in 21. So I guess you'd only been married for a year before I met you. And now you have a fantastic addition to your family.
Yes.
Who is how old now?
Well, 1 year this week.
1 year this week. Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to say personally, it has been a blessing to have you as a friend, as a brother in Christ, and as a co-host here on the podcast. Has been wonderful. And I'm glad we were able to kind of get through the rest of your story today.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So, looking forward to lots of exciting things coming up on this show. We're not going to talk about them too much now, but we do have Say a Prayer. Anybody, God willing, a very special guest lined up here in a couple of weeks. Lots of great topics and a list of some other guests that we should be seeing on the show very soon. So that's all from us for today. We hope you all have a wonderful and blessed day, and we will see you next week back here on Spirit Spire.